welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we're going to discuss on ethics in research. Now before we go into discussing about what is ethic, what we do, why do we kind of discuss about ethics, we know that we as social scientists, as sociologists are studying human behavior. We study the way people think, the way people react, the people emotions, and therefore sometimes we need to kind of interpret others' feeling into our own research, and therefore it is very important to maintain ethical professionalism in research. Today's lecture we're going to talk about thinking in research methods and try to understand what is meant by ethics, how many sociologists have kind of moved away from being ethical in research, some of the strategies to kind of contain our ethics in research are the core content of today's lecture. So let us understand what is ethic. Ethic in research involves principles that guide how researchers interact with the subject, analyze data, and report findings. So, the most important is in terms of the researcher's interaction with the respondent or the community or the individual that a researcher is making it as a subject of research. So, our subject of research would be the life of other people, and therefore it is very important that we are concerned about the way in which the interaction or the way in which interviews and observations are conducted. Now it comes into the analysis of data. Now since we are talking about the behavior, the emotions, these are the private opinions of individuals. So how do we put it as public data? How do we put it as part of our research? And therefore in terms of the publications of the finding of the research in ways of reports. So being ethical ensures the protection of participants' right and well-being, enhances the credibility and reliability of research outcome, and promotes transparency and accountability in the research process. So when we talk about ethics in research, there are certain basic ethical principles. The first is informed consent. So whichever field we opt to study, whether we are studying the prisoners or we are talking about say workers in the factories, or we are talking about children is say in a medical setup, any informant for that matter, we need to take the consent of the respondents. The participants should be fully aware of the research purpose and their role in it. So, most of the time the sociologists or social scientists are collecting data either for their research academic credentials or for some kind of NGO or international organization. Now, they need to explain to the respondent why the data is being collected, what is the purpose behind the research, and where the data would be published. So, it is the first important thing to take consent of the participant. Number 2 is confidentiality. Researchers must protect the identity and personal information of participants. So, we generally do not use the exact name, address or personal details of informant, and certain alias or certain pseudonyms are assigned. Third is integrity. Researchers should strive for honesty and accuracy in data collection and reporting. So, as researchers, we cannot kind of apply any hidden cameras, or we cannot kind of record any conversation without the awareness of the respondents. So, we know that these are the way in which ethics can be maintained in research. Now, what happens if they are kind of not followed? These principles are not followed. The consequences would be in terms of the outcome on research and the individual of bad ethics. So, misleading research can lead to harmful policies or practices, erosion of trust in the research community. We need to remember that we are not the only researchers going to a particular community, there would be many others who would also visit the same field. If we follow bad ethics, then the people in that particular community would lose faith and not share their personal opinion or their lifestyle with other researchers. It can lead to potential legal ramification and damage to the reputation of individuals and institutions involved. Now, we know that there is a bad ethics, the consequences of bad ethic. Now, as sociologist or as social science researcher, why are we talking about ethics? Because we know that these are certain principles we need to follow and the consequences of bad ethics. Now, the reason that is important to discuss about the desire to be good. So, most people want to see themselves as ethical and good. This desire can create cognitive dissonance when the action contradicts this self-image. So, in your personal interaction with the respondent, the researcher attempts to create a good impression. However, as long as the impression is good and the researcher is not able to get quality data, he or she then falls into the trap of bad ethics and tries to kind of collect back. Now, it is a contradiction between trying to present yourself as good and not being able to follow the principles. To alleviate this dissonance, researcher may rationalize unethical behavior, and this can manifest in number one, tenuous reasoning, selectively interpreting data or methods to fit a desired outcome. So, you are manipulating with the data, you are only using those data which is fitting with the objective of your research, or you want to show that as the outcome of the research. The second, implausible observation, justifying questionable practices or result as acceptable. So, there is no kind of questioning, there is no kind of analytical reasoning, you are just trying to only bring to forefront those practices, those observations which are kind of necessary for your research. Now, this kind of bad ethical in research has an impact on data integrity. Self-deception can lead to biased methodologies where researchers may unconsciously skew data collection to support their hypothesis. Researchers may misinterpret findings to align with their preconceived notions or desires. Transparency. Researchers should strive for transparency in their method and result to foster trust and credibility. The researchers should engage in reflexibility, that is, critically examining one's own biases and assumption and help mitigate the effect of self-deception. Here we are going to referring to the book on thinking through methods by John Martin, and he is talking about the way in which ethic in research is possible, or suggesting the way forward for doing ethical research. In this chapter, he is talking about the dichotomy between science and morality. The two are considered to be opposed to each other, whereas in social science researches we see that there is no disjunction between science and morality. Rather, science is also kind of moral questioning of reality. So, here John Martin challenges the simplistic notion that scientific rigor automatically trumps all other consideration, or that science is an amoral endeavor. Instead, he argues that ethical considerations are not external constraint on research, but are deeply intertwined with and foundational to the quality and integrity of the scientific process itself. He rejects the idea of a clean separation between science and morality. He argues that good science is inherently ethical and unethical practices ultimately undermine the scientific validity of the research. Basically, if you are kind of bringing in your bias, if you are kind of bringing in your self-deception, then you are not doing these study in a unbiased, and therefore it is kind of not scientific study. So, ethics, morality and science are going together. In the section on principal symmetry, basically Martin is trying to argue that there is a direct relation between bad ethics resulting into bad research. That is the central argument, that if you want to do quality, good quality research, you need to practice ethics in research. And that is why the equation bad ethics is equal to bad research becomes central to his argument. And he argues that researchers are not objective, disembodied observer, but human beings with their own motivations, biases, and desire. For example, or when we try to see that why is an individual doing research, say he's doing for an academic degree, to get a PhD degree, and therefore there is a inherent objective fact why he or she is doing it is to improve the career advancement, or you are doing an important research to get recognition. So, there is already an inherent reason, or there is an inherent benefit to the researcher to do this research. So, it is but obvious that there will be certain kind of ethical bias in the research. These human elements can lead to ethical lapses if not rigorously self-examined. The researcher becomes a vehicle for the researcher's self-affirmation of personal agenda rather than a genuine exploration of others' reality. So, there is always this disjunction between your own individual mobility, your advancement versus the representation of the field or the universe in terms of the reality that it is there. So, just because your objective of the research is ABC, you cannot interpret the data accordingly. So, researcher might rationalize ethical questionable decision by framing them as necessary for scientific advancement, when in reality they might be serving personal ends. Researchers often involve situations where there are no clear cut right or wrong answers, because remember, in social science there is nothing called universal truth, or there is nothing called false. Research itself is trying to find out how much true or how much false. So, there is no right or wrong answer. Here, John Martin would emphasize the need for researcher to develop a robust ethical sensibility and the capacity for moral reasoning rather than simply relying on prescriptive rules of institutional review board mandates. So, these bureaucratic structures are there in order to kind of set up certain normative guidelines. But we cannot make our social science research kind of guided by the bureaucratic structures, because there are certain kind of sensibility or moral responsibility of the researcher themselves. In order to understand ethics in research, here the author makes reference to William White's case. Now, William White's Street Corner Society, the social structure of an Italian slum, published in 1943, is one of the most famous and foundational ethnographic studies in sociology. It is a must read book, and it's kind of prescribed in all courses on research method, because it is talking about how the author was trying to understand the slum through participant observation, and this whole idea of how to maintain ethics comes from this ethnography. So, while Street Corner Society is celebrated for its deep insight into the social organization of an immigrant community in Boston's North End, Cornwall, this book also raises important ethical considerations particularly when viewed through a contemporary lens. Martin used the Williams Footwhite Street Corner Society to explain the complexities of ethical research. So, it's kind of a very difficult task for the researchers, because the researcher is kind of conflicting between the own advancement versus the ethical responsibility. Now, what lesson do we learn from William Footwhite's work? And William White's experience with ethical dilemma is a powerful illustration of how easily individual can become swept up in group dynamic and lose sight of their moral principles. These are areas where it is kind of very difficult to study, especially here it's a kind of a gang behavior which is trying to study. So, certain forms of practices or institutions which are considered as non-normative, and the researcher as an outsider, so you are kind of considered as belonging from outside. So, your entry into that gang or into the slum in itself is challenging. So, how do you enter the field? And many a time the researcher take on their change their appearance or take on the appearance of the respondent just to become an insider. But the question is about, is it ethical? So, William White's eventual recognition that his participation in voter fraud was wrong underscores the importance of self awareness and personal integrity in decision making. When we can't rely on a clear moral calculus, it becomes crucial to have guiding principles rooted in values like honesty, accountability, and respect for others. Role models like White can serve as a reminder of the potential consequences of compromising those values, even in the name of research or progress. His experience also highlights the importance of having the courage to stand against the crowd and make ethical choice, even when it might seem easier to go along with the group. William White's experience invites us to consider the motivation behind our action and how they align with our values and the interest of others. The author, that is John Martin, draws a compelling connection between William White's reflection, and Kant's categorical imperative, which emphasizes the importance of treating individual as end in themselves rather than as tools for achieving personal goals. This principle highlights a fundamental ethical consideration: the inherent value of each person and the moral obligation to respect that value in our interaction. So, many a time in research we make use of our connections, our networks, as well as friends. So, using a good friend as a means to an end can be particularly troubling, because it can strain or even damage our relationship. Even if the intention behind the action is not malicious, the act of leveraging a friendship for personal gain can lead to feeling of betrayal or exploitation. This scenario often arises in various contexts, such as work, where one might seek to benefit from a friend's connection or influence without fully considering the impact on the friendship itself. To work through this, it may help to consider a few questions. Number one, intentions. What are your true motivation for involving your friend? Are you genuinely seeking their input or assistance, or are you primarily focused on what you can gain from them? Number two, transparency. Are you being open and honest with your friend about your intentions? Clear communication can help to ensure that your friend feels respected and valued. Number three, mutual benefits. They are way of both you and your friend to benefit from the situation. Ensuring that your action creates a win-win scenario can help maintain the integrity of the relations. Number 4, reflection. After the fact, how do you feel about your action? If you experience guilt or discomfort, it may be a sign that you need to re-evaluate how you engage with your friend in similar situations in the future. Now, addressing these questions can help individual navigate complexities of relationship while striving to uphold ethical principles. Now, how we collect data, whom are we using? Are we kind of only using our friends, our circles, our network for our own benefit, or is a two-way benefit is important? The next thing that Martin discusses is the relationship with the key informant. So, there is a kind of one-to-one relation between the researcher and the key informant. How do you build on this and how do you maintain ethic when in such relations? So, important and often complex dynamic in field research is the relationship between researcher and the informant or central figures who provide crucial insight and support. This relationship can indeed be fraught with ethical considerations, especially when it comes to recognition and reciprocity. The example of White and Dunier illustrate that while researchers may strive to acknowledge the informant contribution through speaking engagement, sharing royalty, or co-authoring work, these gestures may not always prevent feelings of exploitation or resentment. This can happen for several reasons. Number 1, power dynamic. The inherent power imbalance in researcher-informant relationship can create tension. Even with acknowledgement, the informant may still feel that their contributions are undervalued or that they have been used as a means to end. So many a time when we go to the field, we hear our informant say, how is this research going to help us, is going to benefit? So the respondents are very well aware that the data is being used for the benefit of the researchers, either the academic achievements or the recognition. So it is important that the research which is being done equally contributes to the respondents or the key informant. Second, recognition. While sharing credit is important, it often doesn't fully compensate for the emotional and intellectual investment the informant has made. Third, expectations. Informants may have expectations of what giving back means, which can vary significantly. If those expectations are not met, it can lead to disappointment and breakdown in the relationship. Fourth, transparency and communication. Ongoing communication about the research process, intentions, and how the informant contributes will be represented can help mitigate misunderstanding. To navigate these complexities, researchers could consider a few strategies. Number 1, co-creation of knowledge. Involve informants more deeply in the research process, allowing them to have a say in how their contributions are represented. This could include collaborative writing or co-presenting findings. Second, regular check-in. Maintaining open lines of communication through the research process can help ensure that informants feel valued and heard. Regular check-in can allow for adjustment based on their feedback. Tailored acknowledgement. Recognizing that different informants may value different forms of acknowledgement, researchers can ask the informant how they would like to be recognized or what they feel would be meaningful to them. So, you need to basically build a healthy relationship with your key informant in order to mitigate the imbalance or kind of make it turn to profitable to the researcher. So, the ethical line lies in honesty and transparency. When someone uses another for personal gain while disgusting their true intention, it undermines trust and can damage the relationship. So, this is how in this chapter on ethical research, John Martin talks about what we mean by ethic, how we maintain a relationship with the informant, and strategies to maintain ethical research, which is very important, especially researching on some of the key issues, social problems in contemporary times. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.